The day I met David felt like a scene straight out of a romantic movie, the kind that seems too perfect to be real. I was tucked away in my favorite corner of a small coffee shop, completely absorbed in a novel that had been my companion for weeks. Suddenly, a voice broke through my bubble. "That's one of my favorite books." I looked up, and there he was, smiling, calm, with an easy charm that instantly put me at ease. We started talking, and what began as a casual chat soon turned into hours of conversation. We shared dreams, fears, favorite authors, and everything in between. It felt like the universe had conspired to bring us together. For weeks after that first meeting, I kept finding him in the places I frequented. At the gym, at the local bookstore, even at a party I was reluctantly dragged to by my roommate. At first, I thought it was fate, or maybe just lucky coincidence. But slowly, a strange pattern started to emerge. David knew things about me that I hadn't shared with anyone. Details about my daily routine, my favorite spots in town, even things I only whispered in private. It was unsettling, but I brushed it off as him being attentive, maybe too attentive. The truth was far more disturbing. David had been meticulously planning his approach for months, even years before I met him. He researched where I worked, what hours I kept, and who my closest friends were. He befriended my roommate just to get invited to the party where we had our first real conversation. Every step of the way, he engineered our meetings to look like coincidences, making me believe that fate was on our side. I remember the first time I really questioned it, when he surprised me with my favorite flowers, orchids, that I had never mentioned to him. Later, I found out he had spent weeks interrogating my aunt about my grandmother's favorite blooms, just so he could use them as a symbol during our engagement. Every thoughtful gesture, every romantic word, was rehearsed, memorized, and tailored to perfection. It wasn't love, it was manipulation, and the worst part, I didn't see it. I was blinded by what I thought was romance, caught up in the whirlwind of charm and attention. He made me feel special, chosen, like I was the center of his world. But in reality, I was just a project, a puzzle he was piecing together to fit his idea of perfection. Looking back, I shudder at how calculated everything was, how every smile hid an agenda, how every coincidence was a trap. David wasn't looking for love, he was looking for control, and I was the perfect target. For the first year, David was everything I thought I wanted: charming, attentive, and seemingly flawless. He had this incredible ability to anticipate my needs before I even voiced them. Whether it was remembering my favorite coffee order or knowing the exact song to play when I was feeling down, David made me feel seen and understood in a way I hadn't before. To the outside world, we were the perfect couple, effortlessly in sync, endlessly happy. Friends envied us, family approved. Everything looked like a dream. But behind the polished smile and thoughtful gestures, the cracks had begun to appear. They were subtle at first. Little things that I brushed off because I wanted to believe in the man I loved. David's curiosity about my life sometimes felt less like genuine interest and more like an interrogation. He would ask about my friends, my family, my past relationships. But there was always an edge to his questions, as if he was gathering information to use later. Whenever I hesitated or gave vague answers, he'd flash that charming grin and move on, but the discomfort lingered in my chest long after. Then there were the nights he vanished without explanation. Calls unanswered, texts ignored. When I pressed him, he'd offer tired excuses, work stress, needing space, but friends told me a different story. They saw him out late, with people I didn't know, places I hadn't been invited to. It wasn't just secrecy. It felt like a betrayal, an intentional omission that left me feeling isolated and confused. Yet I convinced myself to trust him, to hold on to the hope that this was just a rough patch. Even during the day, the subtle control started creeping in. David would comment on my appearance in ways that felt more like critiques than compliments. "You could look amazing if you just tried a little harder," he'd say with a soft laugh, but the words left a bitter taste. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was playful teasing, but deep inside, the doubt crept in. Was I not good enough? Was I failing to meet some invisible standard he had set? The most devastating blow came when I learned about Jessica, David's ex-girlfriend. I had assumed their breakup was mutual or even amicable, but slowly, the truth unfolded. David had ended things with Jessica, not because of lost feelings, but because he had set his sights on me. Jessica had no idea why he suddenly grew distant and cold. For him, I wasn't just someone to love. I was a conquest, an obsession. The realization stung sharply, tearing apart the image I had of our relationship. As time went on, his obsession became suffocating. David kept meticulous tabs on my whereabouts, who I talked to, and how I spent my time. Attempts to set boundaries were met with guilt trips, subtle accusations that I was being unreasonable or ungrateful. The man I thought I knew, the one who had promised me love, was slipping away, replaced by someone who saw me not as a partner, but as a possession to be controlled and shaped. As the months passed, I started noticing subtle changes in David's behavior that I desperately tried to ignore. At first, it was just small things, little comments disguised as jokes or concern that slowly chipped away at my confidence. He'd question where I was going or who I was spending time with, but always with a smile and a tone that made it sound like he was just worried about me. When I told myself to trust him, it was easy to brush off those moments as harmless. But the control seeped in slowly, like water dripping into a glass, almost unnoticed until it was overflowing. David wanted to know everything about my day, the people I met, the places I went, even my thoughts and feelings. I started feeling like my world was shrinking, with him at the center of it, and me losing myself piece by piece. When I wore certain clothes, he'd jokingly ask if I was trying to get attention, making me feel guilty for wanting to look nice for myself. One night, I caught him scrolling through my phone when I wasn't looking. My heart sank. When I confronted him, he said, "I'm just making sure you're safe." But I knew it was more than that. It was about control, about making sure I stayed within his reach. I felt trapped in a cage I didn't realize was closing around me. Even then, I clung to the hope that this was love, because love had to be forgiving, right? I told myself that everyone has flaws, that maybe David's insecurities came from his love for me. I wanted to believe that the man I fell in love with was still there beneath the cracks. Then, the breaking point came at a friend's party. I wasn't supposed to overhear the conversation between David and an acquaintance, but fate had other plans. His voice was low and bragging as he spoke about me, how he'd planned every move to win me over, how easy it was to manipulate me into falling for him. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I wasn't a partner. I was a game piece, a project to be perfected. When I confronted David, his expression darkened. He didn't deny it. Instead, he said, "You don't understand. I love you in my own way. Sometimes you have to take control to keep what's precious." Those words echoed coldly in my mind. Love shouldn't feel like possession or control. But I was scared. Scared of losing him. Scared of being alone. Scared of the truth I wasn't ready to face. I stayed silent, trapped between fear and hope, in a relationship that was slowly suffocating me. The day of our wedding was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The venue was perfect, white roses everywhere, a string quartet playing softly, and champagne flowing like water. My dress was a dream, a costly masterpiece that made me feel like a princess. David looked sharp, in his custom tuxedo, his smile radiant as his friends shared stories and laughter. Everyone seemed so happy, so sure this was the start of something beautiful. But beneath the surface, I was nervous. There was an unspoken tension between David and his best man, Marcus. I knew Marcus had been his roommate for years, and though he was no longer the best man, David's brother had taken that spot. Marcus was still an important figure. I had heard their stories, their college antics, and I trusted them both. When Marcus took the microphone, his speech started like any other, praising David's determination, his focus, and his charm. But as he spoke, his words took a darker turn. He started telling the crowd about how David had been obsessed with me from the moment he saw me at that coffee shop years ago. Not in a romantic, sweet way, but in a way that felt calculated and creepy. He described how David had stalked my routines, befriended my roommate, and planned every meeting. The charming guy I thought I knew had been orchestrating our entire relationship like a puppet master. My blood ran cold as Marcus revealed how David had even ended his previous relationship just to pursue me without distraction. The room grew, silent. My heart pounded as Marcus went on to expose how David's proposal, so romantic and meaningful to me, was anything but spontaneous. David had spent weeks researching my grandmother's favorite flowers and poems to make it perfect, rehearsing his speech over and over until it was flawless. Then came the most shocking part. Marcus said David considered our marriage just the next phase of his plan. He had a list of adjustments he wanted to make to me after the honeymoon, treating me like a project to be molded. I looked at David, his face pale and tense, panic flashing in his eyes. When I asked him if it was true, he snapped at Marcus to stop. But Marcus wasn't finished. He accused David of loving the idea of owning me, not loving me. The microphone fell, the room was frozen, and I felt like the world had shattered beneath my feet. I slowly stood up, my expensive dress rustling, in the silence, and walked out of my own wedding reception, past the shocked faces, past my crying mother, past the flashing cameras. I knew then that I had to end this. I had to save myself. I walked out into the cool night air, the dress rustling around my legs, like a whisper of the life I thought I had. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through my chest. The shocked faces behind me, the hundreds of eyes fixed on my every move, didn't matter. I had to get away. Away from the lies. Away from the man I thought I loved. Away from the nightmare disguised as a wedding. I didn't know where I was going, just that I had to move. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer. I barely managed to speak the words, but they were clear. I need to file for divorce, now. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, but I felt a strange mixture of relief and dread wash over me. Driving through the empty streets in the middle of the night, the city lights blurred as tears streamed down my face. Memories of David, the smiles, the late-night talks, the promises, twisted into sharp shards of betrayal. How could I have been so blind? How could someone so loving on the surface be so manipulative underneath? The next morning, David showed up at my door, desperate and pleading. "Sarah, please don't do this. We just got married," he said, his voice breaking. But I had already made up my mind. "No, David. We never really got married. Not to you," I replied quietly but firmly. The annulment was finalized 6 weeks later, the court agreeing on fraud and irreconcilable differences. It was a bitter victory, but a necessary one. A few days later, Marcus reached out to me. He sounded remorseful as he apologized for ruining my wedding day, but I thanked him instead. When I asked why he'd exposed David, he said, "You deserved to know who you were really marrying, even if it cost me my best friend." The months that followed were some of the hardest of my life. Trust felt like a fragile, broken thing, and healing seemed impossible. But slowly, day by day, I began to rebuild myself. Then, unexpectedly, I met someone new at a bookstore. There was no grand plan or hidden agenda, just two strangers connecting over a shared love of books. Our conversations flowed naturally, laughter came easily, and for the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful again. When he finally proposed, it was clumsy and unpolished. He forgot the ring at home and stumbled over his words. But his sincerity was undeniable. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. After everything I had endured, the betrayal, the heartbreak, and the crushing realization that the man I loved was nothing like I imagined, I had lost faith in love. I questioned if I could ever trust someone again, if I could allow myself to be vulnerable without the fear of manipulation lurking in the shadows. Then I met him. Not in a grand cinematic moment, but in the quiet corners of a bookstore, surrounded by shelves of forgotten stories. He was different. No games, no hidden motives, just genuine kindness shining through his warm smile and easy laugh. We talked about books, the small joys of life, and the dreams we hadn't dared to speak aloud. Our relationship blossomed slowly, naturally, like a flower unfolding under the gentle sun. There were no overwhelming gestures or dramatic confessions, just quiet mornings sipping coffee, long conversations about everything and nothing, and the simple comfort of knowing someone truly saw me. For the first time in years, I felt safe to be myself, flaws, fears, and all, without fear of judgment or control. He never rushed me or asked me to forget my past. Instead, he stood beside me, patient and understanding, letting me heal at my own pace. His respect was a balm to my broken spirit, and his presence slowly stitched the torn pieces of my heart back together. One evening, he nervously reached into his pocket, pulled out a small velvet box, then suddenly realized he'd forgotten the ring at home. I couldn't help but laugh at the imperfect moment. It was so human, so real. When he finally proposed properly, it was with genuine words and an open heart. That imperfect proposal was more meaningful than any grand gesture I'd ever imagined. It symbolized a new beginning, not just for us as a couple, but for me as an individual reclaiming my life and my ability to love. I learned that true love isn't about control or possession. It's about trust, respect, honesty, and accepting each other's imperfections. As I prepare to step into this new chapter, I carry with me the scars of my past, but also the strength they've given me. The road ahead may still have its challenges, but I'm ready to face it with hope, courage, and a heart open to real love. The day of my new wedding was unlike anything I had ever imagined. There were no towering floral arrangements or extravagant decorations, just an intimate gathering of the people who had truly stood by me through the darkest times. Friends and family filled the room with warmth, laughter, and genuine smiles. It wasn't a fairy tale celebration, but it was real, raw, honest, and full of meaning. As I stood there, holding his hands tightly, a profound calm settled over me, a calm I hadn't felt in years. This was love on my terms, free from manipulation, deceit, and control. No agendas, no hidden motives, just two people who had chosen each other freely, who were ready to face the future together, whatever it might bring. I looked around the room at the faces of those who believed in me, who had supported me when I couldn't even support myself, and I realized how far I'd come. From the night I walked out of my first wedding in tears, to the painful months of healing and self-discovery, to now standing in front of the people who mattered most, I was no longer the scared, broken woman I had once been. I had rebuilt myself piece by piece. I learned to trust my own instincts, to demand respect, and to understand what true love really meant. This moment wasn't perfect. Love rarely is, but it was authentic, and that was all that mattered. David and Marcus were chapters in my story, but they no longer held power over my life. I had reclaimed my voice, my heart, and my future. The scars I carried were no longer reminders of pain, but symbols of resilience, strength, and survival. Every tear, every sleepless night, every doubt had led me here, to this new beginning, filled with hope. As we danced beneath the soft glow of fairy lights, surrounded by the hum of music and the joy of those who celebrated with us, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like mine to shape. No more fear, no more lies, just an open road ahead, full of love, trust, and endless possibilities. And in that moment, I finally knew this was where my true story began.